Hello, I'm Bob Wilhelm, and I'm an iconographer. That is, I paint icons. So, in this video, I want to introduce you to my very first icon, which is kind of surprising to me at this time, because I would have identified my very first icon as an icon I painted in the 1990s under the direction of iconographer Peter Pearson at the event sponsored by the Byzantine Catholic Church I belong to in the Baltimore, Maryland area. So that's technically where my first icon was painted. However, my first encounter with an icon is a little more complex. In some ways, it goes back to childhood and holy cards in the Roman Catholic tradition. But the first encounter with an icon really goes back to 1973, when I was in England, a graduate student at Cambridge University. And we were expecting our third child. Our first two children had died. Ian and Kyla had died from a rare genetic disease. We had hoped that our third child would avoid it. There was only a 1 chance in 4 that he would have it, but it was a hope. It was not reality. And even though we moved from San Francisco to England so I could continue my studies, the move was also motivated by a desire to be in someplace new, someplace not tainted by suffering and death. And we knew as the delivery time approached, we arrived at Christmas time. Kelly was quite pregnant. In a couple of months, the baby would be born, but we were beginning to strongly suspect that this child, because of its activity in the womb, would be like its brother and sister and also have the same infantile muscular atrophy, or as it was called then, Verdnick-Hoffman syndrome, that would result in this child's death before the first year of life was over. So, at the beginning of Lent, and I don't remember the exact day of Lent, there was a lecture being given, a very popular, famous kind of lecture at the church called Great St. Mary's. It was the university church. Each of the colleges at Cambridge since medieval times had their own chapels, and the chapels were devoted for devotions to people who were a part of the college. But the collective university did not have a common worship area. There were churches in the town of Cambridge, but there was nothing to bring together the two communities, the townsfolk and the college folk. And then somewhere, and I don't know the exact history, but a very large medieval church was built between the downtown market area, where farmers and others would bring their produce and livestock and so forth and sell on market days, and some of the larger colleges facing the market area on one side and facing the Cam River on the back side. In this area, a new church was built. Maybe there was a church before, I don't know. But it was a big church, and it was a church designed to hold a lot of people. It's called, there was another St. Mary's church in Cambridge, so this was called Great St. Mary's. Now, Kelly and I became acquainted with Great St. Mary's because we went there and we met the associate pastor, Father Mark, an Anglican priest, and his wife, who were much about our age and who were very warm and compassionate. And I would frequently go there, or we would go there when we were down in market or when we were at our college for a college event nearby. We'd go there and we'd see Mark. Mark would work during the day, and we'd sometimes join him in prayer in one of the side chapels. And I would sometimes help Mark because it was the residence of a lot of homeless people, homeless men, who stayed in the church all day long, especially in the winter when it was cold. And at the end of the day, the church would close, and they'd have to be escorted out so they could go to the shelters, the shelters for homeless people. And they would be, I think they would be given a meal there, and they'd sleep there overnight. And the following morning, they would be escorted out of the homeless shelter and told not to come back until night. And where would they go? Great St. Mary's. So going to Great St. Mary's always meant that there were men who looked rather disheveled, who were down and out in their lives and their luck, or however you want to describe it, who would be sleeping on the pews or under the pews or in corners of the church. And there were a good number of them. And Mark would, in his own way, minister to them, talk with them, and so forth. But at the end of the day, he needed to usher them out. And I was frequently there at the end of the day, coming back from my college, St. Edmund's House, now called St. Edmund's College. And I would help him. The two of us would sometimes lift a couple of arms or steady a very unsteady person to the door and escort them out and tell them to come back the next day. So this was part of my life there. But when Lent came, the great lecture was to begin. A very distinguished lecturer was always brought there. I don't recall the names of the lecturers over the years. Certainly medieval preachers, I would imagine Dominican friars, Franciscan friars, theologians would appear there for a Lenten lecture. And of course with the Reformation, Cambridge became part of the center of the Presbyterian tradition, the certainly non-Catholic, but certainly also non-Anglican high church. This was low church stuff. These were people who were merchants, who had a different spirituality from the Cavaliers. The big Civil War, of course, happened in England at that time. But St. Mary's, Great St. Mary's, became a place where many of the Puritan, Pilgrim, Presbyterian, Calvinist preachers would preach during the years that they were in ascendancy. So it was a great event. It was packed. I think it was always packed. It was packed when I was there. There were easily 100 people there, maybe 200, 300, I don't know. Yeah, and Kelly didn't want to go. She was ending the period of her pregnancy. She was tired. It was a good mile and a half to get there by walking. And we could take the bus, but bus service was erratic. And I decided to go myself. Because I was a theologian, right? What better reason? I'm a theologian. I'm going to go to Great St. Mary's for the great lecture, sermon for Lent in 1973. I arrived there, and the place was packed. I don't know where I stood, somewhere in the church with other people. It was a mixed group of people, students, professors, mostly English, but people from other backgrounds as well, including myself, an American. And the speaker, Metropolitan Anthony Bloom, a Russian immigrant, Orthodox priest, trained as a medical doctor. Had, I think at that point, recently been appointed the Metropolitan of the Orthodox Church outside Russia in England. And their main seat of worship, I believe, was London, not far from Cambridge. So he was the speaker, and I remember his presence. He was a very imposing man, big man, had that Russian look about him. And he spoke good English, and he gave his lecture, but I don't remember a single thing about that lecture. I don't know, I was distracted, I wasn't interested, it was too theological, it was on some obscure topic for me. I mean, I don't really know. The lecture went on, and I was, I don't know if I was standing or sitting somewhere, milling around a bit, but it was a disappointment. It was a disappointment. Then, of course, the break came. It's always the break at an English event like this. Tea would be served, right? Tea would be served. And the area was cleared out. People were milling around. tea was served, if I remember correctly, in little Dixie cups, what we in America call Dixie cups. I mean, no fine china, little plastic, paper, wax covered little cups. And the tea, of course, would be brewed, and the hot milk would be there, and the sugar would be there. And the ladies, I think there were ladies who were handling this, ladies' auxiliaries at Great St. Mary's, would pour the tea for you and give it to you at the table, and then you'd go wandering off somewhere and talk with friends or strangers or whatever. So I got a cup of tea, and I drifted away. I didn't particularly want to. I had no intentions in mind. I was still disappointed by the lecture, but I hoped that the discussion that would follow the tea would enliven me. Metropolitan Anthony was also there, and he got his tea. But we had no personal contact. And somehow I drifted away from the table that was in the main sanctuary. I think it was in the main sanctuary. I don't think there was a side thing. Everything was happening there right in the center. And I drifted away further and further and further away as I pulled back, sipping my tea and watching. I saw Metropolitan Anthony and others, and there were people interacting with each other, talking theology, talking all that stuff about Lenten spirituality. And we reached the point in which I saw my first icon. Now, I say this very, very carefully, because it was not a painted icon. It was a living icon. And the icon was, well, I won't define the icon now. I'll tell you a little bit of the story. This is the most important thing about this video. The rest was all introduction. This is how I discovered icons, and this has been my inspiration for icons in my spirituality since that time. So, as everyone is milling around, kind of a semi-disorganized way, nothing's really happening. There are all kinds of people there sipping their tea and bumping into each other and exchanging short conversation. Young students, probably a couple of years younger than me, and old professors and tutors and so forth, and people from the townsfolk, merchants and stuff who also came in. They were all milling around. And then something happens. And this is what I want to talk about. Something happens. Metropolitan Anthony is, I can't really judge now, but maybe I would say 40 or 50 feet away from me, 60 feet maybe. And there's a space between us, and there's a lot of milling about. And suddenly, okay, no, we haven't spoken to each other. He doesn't know who I am. I know who he is, but, we're 60 feet apart. We see each other through the passing figures mingling about. And suddenly, the area clears. It's amazing. Everyone who was in that central area, that stage, if you want to put it that way, kind of drifts away, and the whole area clears. And there's nothing between Metropolitan Anthony Bloom, 60 feet away, and myself, except maybe the teacups that we're holding, sipping. And he fixes me in his gaze. That's important. It's not so much I'm looking at him. I was looking at him, but, inattentively. I was viewing the scene. But he focused on me and focused on me with his gaze. He held me in his gaze. I could not pull away from this. I could not disengage. Metropolitan Anthony held me by gazing at me. So the first thing I want to say about this before I continue the story is this is how it's so very different from Western art or other art forms, how an icon, an Eastern Christian icon, is different. Great Western art, at least traditional art, think of the great masters and so forth. we are looking at their paintings. We are looking into the world that they have portrayed. We are in control. We are re-editing what we're seeing. We're judging it. We're enjoying it. We're criticizing. It doesn't make any difference. But we're looking through a window. And part of the looking through the window is also the sense of the perspective. We're looking toward the horizon. The scene recedes in the distance. And we're kind of invited in. Come on in. Come into the picture. You are the one who are looking at the picture. You're discovering, you're exploring, you're interpreting, you're giving meaning. You're giving meaning. The picture is being recreated by you. Okay, that's Western art. Traditional Western art. In this event, and I won't talk about icons, painted icons yet, I want to talk about Anthony, Metropolitan Anthony. I wasn't looking at him. He wasn't looking at me. He was engaging me. He held me in his gaze. If his gaze should have broken off, it would have been the end. The end of our encounter. But he held me in his gaze. It was, of course, as he is a very intense gaze, he's a very intense man. And he held me in his gaze. And this is what happened when he held me in his gaze. He didn't come closer to me. I didn't approach him. I don't even think we exchanged words after the whole thing was over. I mean, I don't remember exactly, but I don't think, I think the whole thing was in that moment, or those few moments. How long? I don't know, maybe 5 minutes. Maybe longer, maybe shorter. Time is hard to measure when you're caught up in it. And what I felt was that he was approaching me, that he was holding me in his being, that my existence at that moment depended upon his gaze, his ability to see me, to see deeply into me, to see through me, to understand who I was without judgment, but with some kind of compassion. That's important. So I was beheld by the blazing eyes, the intense face of Metropolitan Anthony Bloom, Orthodox bishop. And I felt that he could see into the bottom, to the far ends of my being. And I didn't know whether it was he who saw or whether it was God who was looking through him. This is important. But I felt that my existence was affirmed. An existence that I did not even fully understand. Because I knew that I was being seen as I really was. No illusions, no mind trips, no spinning, interpreting, creating what I wanted to see in myself and who I thought I was. And I was being beheld, and that beholding held my existence. I would have tumbled into nothingness if I was not being beheld lovingly, if not my true self was not being seen, even if I myself didn't know what my true self was. But Metropolitan Anthony, and behind him God, held me in a loving gaze, a challenging gaze, a gaze without words, but a gaze that said everything. Well, it was over. Again, I don't know how long it took. I never saw Metropolitan Anthony again. The child was born, Bartholomew was born. He was very sick. We knew from his birthday. Pastor Mark, the associate pastor, came to the hospital where Kelly had given birth, and he comforted her. He said he had been given the gift of healing. He prayed with her, and it was a great healing for us. It's another story connected with this.
because we went on another pilgrimage before we came back to America. We went to the same places we had gone in December,
Where we had asked God for
for healing and hope. And we received not what we wanted, but we had received healing and a very sick child. And we made our decision to bring him back to California to bury him with his brother and his sister. And it was so hard. So after we returned to America, after Bartholomew died, I picked up a book by Metropolitan Anthony called, I think it's called Beginning to Pray. And I discovered his teachings. And I felt that what he began in Cambridge now made sense to me. Beautiful book. He's written other books, and I've read them too, but it's that first book that I go back to again and again and again. I don't know how many Lents I've lived through, and I've gone back to his book. And the whole scene at Great St. Mary's Church is somehow relived. And God comes to me through Metropolitan Anthony, seeking me out, saying, I know who you are. You don't know who you are. Your mind is filled with illusions of who you think you are, who you want to be, who you're afraid you are. Smoke and mirrors. But I know who you are. And I love you. So that was my first icon. To get back to icons. That was my first icon. Anthony himself was the icon. And behind Anthony was the person of a loving God who didn't appear to me in some vision or some dream, but who appeared to me in the face, the eyes of a real human being who reached out to me, who encountered me. Rang so true to what I had come to understand about the religion of Israel. Israel is an encounter between God and the people of Israel, between God and every Jew. It's not a set of theoretical theology. It's not theology, it's an encounter. Martin Buber taught me this. So, yeah, Metropolitan Anthony is one of my three teachers. The others I spent many years with. George Rosner, my secular Jewish Gestalt therapist who trained me for a long, long time. And also Wayne Rood, my Seventh-day Baptist educator and artist at the G2U who led me through the doctoral program. But you see, I sought them out. I sought them out. I became their pupils for years. In Cambridge, I was sought out unexpectedly. I was seized, and I didn't know what it meant at that time, but it changed something in me so profoundly. I still don't know what it is. It was maybe like being Paul on the road to Damascus. I don't know. But it was my first icon. I sometimes call it my miraculous and mysterious icon because it was many years later. It was over 20 years later when I painted St. Mary Magdalene under Peter Pearson's direction. And I didn't make the connection with Metropolitan Anthony then. I thought I was just doing something new. I had continued with my long journey from my Roman roots in Catholicism to my Greek roots in Catholicism, because I came from a community that was both Eastern and Western Catholic, a Hungarian Slovak community in New York City. And I knew both traditions. And eventually I would change my rite officially to become a Byzantine Catholic rather than a Roman Catholic, but that's not important. I thought it was important. It's not important. I've always been a Roman Catholic and a Byzantine Catholic. I don't need the authority of anyone to say this is your official right. Maybe you need to do that if there are priests who do the liturgy and you want to make sure they do it right and you want to authorize them, etc. You make them bi-ritual priests, but that has nothing to do with the lives of ordinary people. So, what I have discovered in painting icons, and now I jump ahead to where I am now because for many years I painted a whole variety. You can see my icons on my website. And I struggled so hard to be theologically correct, to follow the rules of the great masters. And somewhere along the line I realized, I really did, I realized that there's something wrong with those rules. That the academic and ecclesiastical ways of judging an icon are really quite irrelevant. That one does not copy an icon. One cannot copy an icon. An icon is a copy of the eidos behind it. So we go back to Greek, and I want to skip over all the philosophical subtleties developed over the centuries by Plato and Plotinus and Christian theologians, etc., 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 on what the relationship between the eidos and the icon is. But I do not believe that, except under unusual circumstances, you can move from an icon to get an original vision, a genuine icon reflecting the eidos. It can be done. It's kind of a reverse engineering process. It had to have happened that way. Some of the great Russian iconographers had icons that they were familiar with of, let's say, Abraham and Sarah, and inviting the strangers to share a meal with them in the desert. And that was their starting point. But they somehow reversed engineered it so that they could see a different vision. They could go back to the original vision, which is different from the one painted on the icon. So when you look at Rublev's picture of the Old Testament Trinity, as it's sometimes called, it's filled with a different quality of light. It's filled with a simplification of the structure of it. And it is connected with all his predecessors, but he did not copy them. He found a way to go through the icon to the encounter with the eidos that creates an icon. And he found a way to create a new icon, violating so many of the principles of the established ecclesiastical academies and schools, that we have no doubt that his is a masterpiece, and that it is an encounter with God, and that invites us to do the same, to gaze at his beautiful icon and to somehow reverse engineer it. Not just to see the icon, but to see what is hidden, what only the icon can reveal. To go from the world, I'm using this in a popular sense, maybe the sense that ordinary Greeks used it when they first were using this language to describe their religious beliefs and so forth, before all the philosophers and theologians made it technical stuff that only they could interpret. And I think in the original popular usage, which I think we have access to, there's a strong sense that there is an ultimate reality that is not to be confused with the phenomena of what we see. The phenomena are beautiful. We see all these things in the world. We experience them. They give us joy. They give us sorrow. But that's not where the reality is rooted. The reality is rooted in the noumenal, in the hidden, the reality behind appearances. And there are many ways of dealing with that, like in Hinduism, just as an example. I taught in Hinduism at one time.
You either saw all of this as illusion, the phenomenal world's an illusion, and you want to escape from it. Mainline Hinduism, or the Tantric tradition, which deals with it in a very interesting way. That yes, it is illusion, but this is the illusion that we have. It's play. It's playfulness. We play with the illusion. We don't dismiss it. We know its limits, but we celebrate it. So we can live in the phenomenal world, this world, and still be rooted in the hidden world where ultimate reality is. So, to go back and to finish up my presentation, when I paint an icon now, my style is changing. I'm less concerned about the great contemporary icon painters who have very specific rules and ways of judging, and even the church authorities. Yes, I believe an icon placed in a public place of worship needs the blessing of the church authorities. And to say, yes, this is not in violation of any of our deeply held truths and faith. This is a help. This is not a problem. You know, it's like creating a canon of scripture. The authorities did that. You know, this gospel is authentic and that gospel is not. And we accept that. That doesn't mean we can't read the other gospels and draw wisdom from them, but we understand the difference. So in the Russian tradition and the Orthodox traditions, Eastern Church traditions, many icons are really family icons. They're individual. They're smaller. They're smaller pieces. They're usually portable, and they're put in what is called the beautiful place, or the blessed place in the house. Very frequently at the door of the house or some corner of the house, and it's a place of perpetual prayer. It's a place where the presence of God through his saints and through the miracles of the good news is present to ordinary life. And for most people who live rather desperate lives of poverty, I think of Russia in the 19th, 18th, 17th, 16th century, the plagues, the invasions of the Middle Ages, and the squalor of ordinary people amidst the wealth of the boyars, the nobility, and the czars. And this gave them great comfort. It was where they went to pray. It's where they stopped as they entered and left their houses and took a moment to cross themselves and to utter a prayer to the Most Holy Trinity and to the saint. So I'll explore this some more in the future, but I want to tell you that for me now, I understand the icon in terms of what happened at Great St. Mary's Church in Cambridge in 1973. That the eidos, which does not mean idea, that's how it's academically translated, where there are these ideas, these pure ideas, and they're simply made manifest in the external world, and the way that the external world conforms to the purity of those ideals is what makes whatever is real in the external world real. And of course, those ideals become very abstract. So they become ideas. So eidos becomes identified with truth, with beauty, with divinity. On and on and on. We attach it to an idea where the eidos is the living presence of what is ultimately real, hidden from our eyes. As Paul says, now we see through a glass darkly, then we shall see face to face. And that revelation of the presence of God, the holy face of God, in whatever form it takes, enters into us, engages us, gives us our sense of who we are, makes us fully human and divine. Some of the Greek church fathers would say, and very beautifully, excuse the gender use here, but I want to stay faithful to their language. God made man so that man may become God. The whole process of what is called theosis, the divinization of humanity. So we move from a very imperfect reflection of our Creator to a very full, engaged image as we become more and more like the God who beholds us in God's loving gaze. So all of our works are icons in this world. Some of us do artistic icons. Some of us counsel people. Some of us minister to those who are sick and dying. Well, I could go on and on. But the whole idea is to always connect with the source, not to confuse the image, the results here with the source. The source is much greater. It's ever renewing. It's ever filling out, spilling out into the world. God is always coming towards us through his saints, through his Son, through his Spirit, his Ruah, and engaging us. And that is what icons are about. So, I will bring this to an end now. I have some other things I want to do with icons, explore them with you in a prayerful way. Icons are about prayer, about engaging God face to face, person to person. And insofar as we can participate in that, insofar as we fall under the gaze or under the spell of the Holy One, blessed be his name, we are on the road to becoming fully human and, paradoxically, fully divine. I'm Bob Wall. I thank you for taking time to listen to me. And I invite you to enjoy exploring icons and stories. They're so closely connected. The story gives rise to the icon, and the icon in turn gives rise to the story. So when we're talking about sacred storytelling and sacred art, icons and biblical narratives and personal life stories and literary and folkloric creations of myths and parables and fables, we're talking about the same thing. The way God steps into our world, fixes our face so that we gaze upon the Holy One. Blessed be the name. And find the deepest level of our identity. I'm Bob Wall. I'm a storyteller and an iconographer. God bless you.